Thank you for listening to the Chris and Retro podcast. This is a two-part series called Victory of a Congressman. Please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast, and of course, review it on your favorite podcast platform. Part 1 starts now.
Well, welcome back to the Chris and Retro podcast. Today I have a special guest. He is a graduate of Alfred State. He's got his law degree from Ohio Northern. Started out his career with Gallo and Iacovangelo here in Rochester, New York. 98, you went to Corning and had your own practice, primarily focused on debt collection. Is that correct?
A little bit of collection, but municipal work and did a lot of litigation work. So I'd love to be in a courtroom.
Nice. Then in 2007, you became mayor of Corning. And in 2010, you were elected to Congress. My guest today is former Congressman Tom Reed. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, I really appreciate you being here. Some of the other accomplishments that you've had is you're on the House Judiciary Committee, House Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, House Committee on Rules, House Ways and Means Committee, and then one you're particularly proud of is the Problem Solvers Caucus. And that's something that we've talked about over the years. And then in 2022 now, as I said, you're on to you predicted 12 years is where you wanted to be. And in 12 years now, you're on to your next phase of your career.
Yeah, it was a commitment I made right here in Victor at a meeting when I was running for Congress that asked if I believed in term limits. I responded immediately, said yes. And they asked me the follow-up question, which I wasn't prepared for, was how long of term limits are you saying? And I said, well, I guess 12 years would work for me. It's twice the 2 terms of senators, and the president gets 8. So I'm like, that seems fair enough to me. And obviously, we honored that commitment, and we move forward to the next chapter.
Nice. So you do it actually based on some kind of math. I said, 12. And you're thinking, okay, let me see how this would actually make sense.
Yeah, it was kind of off the cuff, but it was a great dialogue. It was during the Tea Party movement, and I believe in term limits, and it was easy to take a position, but I had never been asked the follow-up question of how many years.
Right.
And that's how we got to the 12-year mark, and we reaffirmed that numerous times throughout our campaigns for Congress, and it's something I believe in, and you do your tour of duty there. But don't be afraid to walk away.
Sure.
There's just too many members that I've watched over the years that it becomes who they are. It becomes part of their DNA. And I've talked with a lot of former members, God rest their souls, a lot of them. I'm like, why aren't you gone? Why aren't you done and go back to your family?
Yeah.
And it was sad. Most of them said, I don't have anything else. I don't have family. My family, because it's a grueling job. It's a tough job. You're away from home. You're away from your family. You're away from your kids, your grandkids. And I said numerous times, I just have nothing else to do than this. It was sad to me.
Right.
And I made a commitment to myself and to my wife and my children that we would do our best to make sure we weren't going to be that person.
Right. I admire the commitment. I mean, it's something that we've talked about. It's interesting how you and I met. There's a personal level that we met on, but it did start in a professional setting. The first time I met you was about 2 years ago, I think it was. I was in a different role for a local behavioral health organization. And you were, at the time, doing some work at the VA in Canandaigua, New York, and you were there for a tour, but also going to come see us because we had a facility on the VA campus. Yeah. And I remember when the announcement came through that a congressman was coming through, and everybody's like, the whole building changes because people want to make sure everything's perfect. And and having met you, I probably would have cleaned a little less because you're pretty down to earth.
I get told those stories numerous times, and I always tell people, I'm just Tom. I mean, I got 11 older brothers and sisters, and they keep me in place, and I never forget where I came from and who I am, and so I appreciate people rolling out the carpet for the title, but I didn't do the job for the title. I did the job because I believed in it, and I believed in just helping people.
Right. I think for my personal connection with you was I saw that immediately. And through several conversations through that day, it became apparent to me that you actually were Tom. There's a lot of people, I think, that in public offices or lofty positions in corporations, they say, and it's more of a patronizing, really actually look at me, but I'll just tell you, I'm just Tom. You actually are, you do connect that way. And I know for me that mattered. I'm like, man, this guy's legit. That was honestly my first thought.
I appreciate that.
So then when we went into the treatment facility that we had there on the VA campus, I felt that my understanding of who you were and what mattered to you most really became evident through a few small things. I mean, you were having the conversations, and we were talking about some things relative to policy. I remember our CEO was talking to you about some policy things, and you were offering, your candid advice on the economy and where to invest money that might come for a while. I remember the time you were focused more saying infrastructure is probably your best bet, not on operations. So, you were offering, solid advice economically, but then we walked into a museum area there, and I remember you came particularly focused on the left side of a glass cabinet. And I was oblivious. I mean, I worked there and had no idea what was in that glass cabinet. And do you recall that moment?
Boy, I don't off the top of my head, Chris, but refresh my memory.
There was a groundbreaking ceremony, and you said, I recognize that guy. And I think you were going through political officials, and I'm not sure if it was you or there was something about your father in there.
Yeah.
There was some pieces in there that you were connecting with.
I think I do remember that now, and I've changed a lot physically over the years from when I first ran for office.
Gotcha.
I had gastric bypass surgery years ago and lost over 100 pounds, and
wow.
And God, willing, I've kept it off, and I appreciate where I was and where I'm at. But I saw those photos. I do remember that now, where we were cutting the ribbon, so to speak, on the facility that we added to the VA center there in Canandaigua, and there was an old picture of me. And just in my head, I never changed, I guess, but I'm just so grateful that I had that surgery because it saved my life in regards to my physical health. Because I was going down a path on my physical health. When you carry an extra 150 pounds, puts a lot of pressure on your heart.
Sure thing.
Puts a lot of pressure on your body. And so we made that decision. And
it's something you don't ever stop thinking about, too. It's on your mind all the time, probably.
Oh, yeah. No, exactly. And you feel it. And,
right.
When I first went to Congress, I had a pulmonary embolism that broke off from my calf, clot there, and I have a clotting issue that they identified. And it was definitely all those things coming together to say we physically have to
deal with this.
Got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so we took a drastic, pretty heavy decision to go through gastric bypass surgery, and the family was very supportive. But that was the right choice, and it worked out well in regards to keeping that weight off. And
sure.
Yeah, remember those pictures.
I just remember walking in, and I've been around public officials plenty, and usually they'll see past you. They don't see the details. They're just kind of there to fulfill an obligation. You're sort of there. It's just glass in the eyes, and the words are coming out of the mouth. And so it was interesting to me that you're immediately paying attention to the details of something that facility takes a lot of pride in making sure they maintain. But then moments later, you turn to one of the clients that was there to meet you, and that gentleman, he shared his story and was pretty happy to see you. He'd done a ton of research finding out you were there, and I appreciated that interaction. So how that went down for me fundamentally changed my view of you, not because of anything else I'd known about you before. Candidly, it was just you weren't this congressman, you truly were Tom. And that's something that mattered as our relationship has progressed, as we've gotten to know similar struggles, a lot of life paths that had similar decision making in it. And so for me, that was what was important for me to see you for really the authentic person that what you say is true.
And that's one of the reasons I love the job, is because you came across so many different paths of humanity, of people. And I care about people. I sincerely care about them. And I learn so much from just having the conversation, and then just being in a position hopefully to help someone who's walking the same path, or even if it's a different path than my path, but just be a resource and learn from that experience. And that's what my mom taught me. I mean, my mom always told that to us as young kids growing up in a family of 12, raised she was a single mom. My father passed away when I was 2, and she always taught us that. Never put yourself above anybody else, and you can learn a lot if you actually listen and talk to people, and you can avoid a lot of pitfalls. You can avoid a lot of mistakes and learn from other people's mistakes in a way that makes you stronger. And so it's a win-win. And then you can pay that back and pay it forward. And that was something she instilled in us, and I'm trying to pass on to my family.
Well, part of it you learn because I think that all of us learn when we have at least some self-awareness that we need to learn, that we do have issues that need to be corrected. And so that obviously it was solid advice if you're at least paying attention that you aren't perfect.
No, definitely not perfect. And ego is an amazing thing. It blinds a lot of judgment, a lot of vision, and
Sure.
It's something to keep in check, in my humble opinion.
Right. So when you agreed to come on the show, I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. I know it was a significant drive for you to get there, and I'm thankful you took the time.
You're a good friend, and I appreciate what you do, Chris. And if I can ever help you in any way, and if we can help people together, again, I'm here to serve, and I'm here to help people.
And therein lies the point of this episode. Yeah. So one of the challenges that I had coming in here, and you and I have talked about it too, is because you have come out of political office. There's a lot you've been everywhere on TV. I mean, honestly, you can find you anywhere. Testifying before Congress. Speaking on MSNBC and hostile interviews, and still taking the interview. I'm seeing a lot of appearance. So, how do we make this episode something that's really about what you actually want to do here, and that's to help other people. And so that's exactly what we're doing. So if you're tuning into this episode, recognize where we are. We're coming as people based on the mission of the show to recognize that we all have our own challenges, and that they manifest themselves in varying ways, and you're not exempt from those when you're in a public office. You're not exempt from those when you're in your private home. We all have this whole thing that we're working through, and so this is one more example on this show where high-risk living can lead to ways that you weren't expecting it to fall apart, and when hope seems all lost, hang out for a minute because it's closer than it seems.
Amen.
And so Tom and I are friends in our journey because we both I believe, can learn from each other and help each other along the way in terms of boosting each other when some days don't feel that great. And so that's why the main reason why you're here. Mm-hmm. But I do, obviously my audience knows you for your public persona, and I want to get into some of where did this all start? How does a person go from Alfred State and 70 years later become a U.S. Congressman?
It's a great question, and I don't have an answer for it per se. I just always had a work ethic that I believed in, that was, again, instilled in me from my mother. It exhibited itself in my swimming career. I mean, look at me. I'm not Michael Phelps by any means.
A little shorter
and a little more rounder at times. But and I became an All-American swimmer in college, and so it was always this drive to work hard, try to be successful, but at the same time stay humble. Try to stay grounded, and that is something that served me well, and it continues to serve me well as I go forward in life's journey and the next chapter of my life. And it's those skills, it's what you learn, and across those moments, I came across mentors. I came across further people. My mom is obviously somebody, we've talked about her numerous times already today. She was, God rest her soul, she passed in 1998, but she was truly my solid inspiration. But then there's people like my swim coach, people like Fred Seether, Mike Shaberly. These are folks who impacted my life in so many ways outside of just swimming. And teaching the skills of the sport, and I carried that with me. And so it was a journey of not just me doing it; it was a group of us doing it, not consciously, not with a roadmap per se, but it was just a commitment based on the skills of wanting to help people, serve people, be successful. There's no doubt about that, and at the same time, just enjoy the ride as you go through it.
Right. I didn't realize this about you, but as you're saying this, I just had a new revelation. You do seem to have solid support systems, but not a huge inner circle. Like it seems like, as we'll go through this, I mean, there's been a couple different things. Even you have a friend who's a Democrat that you were on January 7th. You shared the floor together. You seem to consistently have some good people that you hold close, but at the same time, you'll work with anybody. And it seemed, I know in the example you just gave, I know it's a swimming example, but it's a very personal sport. I mean, it's you and all these hours in water, and
Chris, I've never thought about it that way, but I appreciate that, because that's ringing a bell in my head.
Right.
Because a lot of times I feel as I go through this journey that I'm alone, I'm by myself. And when you swim in a pool, 10,000 yards a day at times, you're looking at that black line back and forth, back and forth. And so you're spending a lot of time by yourself. But at the same time, I was very grateful and am grateful about the people that I was able to cross paths with, that are still friends, that are still mentors, and that have helped me in that journey. But it's interesting how you observed that, because I never thought about that per se, because a lot of the issues, and we'll talk about addiction and alcoholism, I'm sure today, that brings us here today. But part of that problem was the alone, the demon that starts taking over in your head, that little voice.
Yeah.
That you and I know that voice and have confronted that demon. But
something will speak to you.
It will
something will talk to you to influence you at some point or another. For me, I found when it's my own head, I'm in trouble.
Amen. And that's where you need people. That's where you got to have the strength. It's not a weakness to reach out for help, to talk to friends, to have people around you. That there's a reason why my spirituality is very important to me. There's a reason why God put them in your life, and your paths are crossing at that time. There is a master plan to this whole thing, and we have to do our part. But at the same time, recognize there's a lot more to this than just what we see with our eyeballs and live from morning to night.
I think, though, that what is nice for me, because I don't have a huge circle, I've got a lot of people I'm acquainted with, but even in the conversations you and I have had, it's kind of like you're looking to somebody next to you and you go, are we good? Are we good? It's nice to be able to look to somebody and say, yeah, you're doing okay. I mean, even if it's just that, you're kind of like, all right, I think we're okay.
This is one of being a member of Congress, I don't think people, I knew a million people. I don't know how many people in my Rolodex that I can go on my cell phone and give you a contact list, tens of thousands. And they're people I know. They're people that I have a relationship, but it's a very lonely business, being in the public official role. It's because you don't. A lot of people are. You don't have that genuine relationship. They tell you the story of Truman's old story in D.C. when you get there is if you want a friend in D.C., get a dog, and there's a reason why that story.
I thought there were a lot of dogs in D.C.
There definitely are. There definitely are, but there's a truth to it that President Truman was tapping into, is that it's a very at times transactional place. It's a very superficial place, because you do run across people that you described that maybe had the preconceived notion as to who I was, and there are a dime a dozen there, and there's a dime a dozen of those across the world that I've gotten to know, and you just got to try to weed it out and feel it out. But a lot of that journey is doing it by yourself.
Sure. My last guest was he's got 2 PhDs and multiple martial arts black belts and all this other stuff, and one of the challenges he has is when there's nothing to accomplish, like still moving forward, still performing at an excellent level, and there's really no belt, no degree, no whatever to chase. And I feels like, you're talking about swimming, you're just hitting the wall, turning around, hitting the wall, turning around. There really isn't anything that just says, yay, you accomplished it. That grind, there has to be, that's where I think those support systems are important, is because sometimes there isn't anything to accomplish. It doesn't feel good.
And one of the things that I've learned, and it's a lesson I keep learning, is that's why you have to appreciate and embrace the journey, the ride. The end point, the celebration, is important, and it's why a lot of us do what we do and that type of thing. Winning the election, winning the race, becoming an All-American, becoming a member of Congress, becoming mayor of the city. They're milestones. But if you don't appreciate the ride, you can get in trouble. And there's parts of my life that I can reflect upon right now with you, and in my mind going through, where that's been a big problem for me.
For sure.
And it causes conflict with my wife, who's been with me since I was 17. She was a little bit older at 20, and we met in Alfred. And she would often say that to me. She's like, "Why aren't you not celebrating? Why aren't you?" I go, "I got to do it again. This isn't good enough."
It's almost a sales mentality where you can be the number one sales rep in a 12-month period, but you're racing to zero. Correct. Because on day one, you're starting all over again.
You know that. Yeah, you know that.
But the thing is, you're hungry. So that accomplishment you're hungry for. And I think that we definitely connect in that level. I'm not very mindful. And I definitely have a lot of days that I burned through that I haven't appreciated the gifts of life, so to speak.
Correct.
Because the hunger in me is so much more hungry for that goal than maybe today was well worth taking it in.
I totally agree, and that's as I've gone down this path and this journey dealing with addiction, it's that process has reinforced to me you have to do that in order to be happy, to be content. Else you start building up resentment, you start building up the wrong priorities, and it's important to do. It's important to do.
For sure. And, this is actually transitioned well into kind of what, where I wanted to go next. I mean, initially was hoping is just something to see, that, how that journey looked for you and how quickly it actually was. I don't think you ever really adjusted. I don't know how. I look back on my life and I can't think of going from the progression of what got you to Congress. I don't know that there's a scenario that would actually prepare you for that role per se.
Not that I can think of.
Because that's like somebody coming out of high school and going into a professional sports team. They got all of this and all the good and the bad that comes on with it. And there's really not a mentor that can prepare you for all those days that you'd had life lessons that would have had you prepare for the environment that you're going to walk into. And I, as an outsider looking in, I truly don't know this. My perception is that life in D.C. is different than life in Western New York.
It definitely is.
Right.
So but there's a lot of similarities between the two. Mm-hmm. But there is no roadmap to becoming a member of Congress. There is no, some people have a family connection and they fall into it from the place of their birth and that type of thing.
Sure.
But even they, there's no, this is what you do, this is how you do it. And that's true with anything in life. There really isn't a roadmap to determine success, in my humble opinion.
Right.
That you can just pick up a book and this is how you're going to do it. Everybody's unique. Now, you can get insight, you can get guidance, you can get advice by doing that, in my opinion. And you need to do that. That's important because you have to have that information. You have to have that background information. But each journey is unique, and I try not to forget that. I try to learn from other people, learn from their mistakes, and hopefully that makes me a little bit better. And then I offer my 2 cents or my experience to try to help people become better themselves.
You and I were having lunch. I think at the Water Street, is it Grill or Cafe there in Geneva one time?
Okay.
And you had indicated one time, and that resonated with me about somebody, I think one of the drivers for you, and I may be speaking on a turn here, but you had said, somebody said not to do it, and you're like, you can't do it. And you're like,
that is true.
And so I have that same driver. The quickest way to get me to do something is tell me I can't.
Oh, I can reminisce about that. There are a lot of people, again, they have the roadmap, and you're supposed to wait your turn, and you will not do that. You will not run for Congress. I can say point blank, I remember that conversation very vividly.
Yeah.
And as I walked out of that meeting and went home and talked to my family, I said, that was the worst thing. That individual who was in a very key position of power, who controlled a lot of my future. And boy, that was not the right message to send to me.
Not with somebody that's competitive.
No, or it just, and who recognizes that life is short, and I'm not going to let other people dictate how I'm going to live my life because they have their own agenda. I'll take their input. I'll try to see their point of view and why they're taking that position. But when they're taking that position for clearly their own self-interest, it definitely does not sit well with me at all. So when you say to me no, there's an instinct response to me that is, well, I'll show you that I can, and get to yes. And it was like when I was a swimmer. I mean, there was people told me numerous times, like, what are you doing? There's no way. And I'm like, let's show you.
What's interesting about that, though, is in that situation, you could clearly identify there was some self-interest. I don't know if that's the case there, but in times when you've had those people tell you can't or don't, it's because of self-interest. But I don't know about you, but one of the things that took me a long time to learn is people's advice to me is really based solely on their perspective and not my lack of ability. There's a lot of times that people I'll take it as like, I suck, when somebody says you can't do that. And actually, it's just that they've a lot of times people well-meaning gives you advice to help you preserve yourself, and they may not have gone through fire after fire after fire and successfully figured it out. They don't have that perspective.
And you also have to recognize some of those people, and I'm sure, and it's a very wise statement what you just said, Chris. A lot of those folks also have that self-doubt. They don't have the confidence.
Right.
And because they're, well, if I can't do it, you can't do it.
Right.
And that. And I've seen that. I've had that type of position put on me before, and I try to encourage those people. Well, no, if I can do it, You can do it. And that's one of the things I do. Like when I go to high schools and colleges and talk to younger generations, I'm like, I'm a nobody. I'm a nobody from Western New York who just happened to be a member of Congress. And if I can do it, I can assure you anybody who wants to do it can do it too. I've met world leaders. People that have been president of the United States, leaders of, met the Prime Minister of Japan, God rest his soul, was just assassinated, and spent time with him. There's nothing unique about them in the sense of their fellow human beings, and they put their pants on one leg at a time. They're going to experience the same journey that we are, in the sense that you're going to be born and you're going to die, and it's the reality of the life. And so people need to, hopefully people out there never forget that.
I think that's a great message for this audience, because our audience is a wide range of individuals. You have some people that are listening in that's day one of recovery. And from vile addictions that just can't keep them, they can't keep it under their belt. And some are on here because they're, dealing with mediocrity in their sales career. And some are CEOs that are raging current alcoholics and know there's everything slipping and nobody can know. So I think that these messages that we're giving people are for that. And I want people to coming from different backgrounds to say, we all get it. Secret sauce is out, man. You can own this. Let's just work with you.
And once you embrace it, boy, the power of it is so positive.
It's a game changer for sure.
Game changer, life changing, and it opens so many new doors that you thought, there's no way. I don't want to be that guy. Right. I don't want to be that guy who is labeled, who's carrying an addiction and dealing with that demon.
Right.
But I will tell you, once I jumped, I am forever grateful that I jumped, and it's opened up so many new opportunities that I never would have had if I stayed where I was.
Going back to what you talked about in terms of our humanity, and you're just a guy from Western New York, it's still challenging for us. I don't know if all people do this. I know I do this. I'll look at specific skills that I admire about you, and I'll say I couldn't play that role. What I've learned over time is that you're really good at what you do in those areas, and I might be good in other areas. We don't have to be the exact same skill set to be effective in a role that I might be shooting for. So, the basics of a YouTube channel, budding YouTube channel, 3rd episode in, I have high aspirations for what it is, and some of the people I'm getting advice from, it's very easy to be intimidated by them. It's very easy to be intimidated by having I know you as Tom, but you're still a U.S. Congressman. You still, I can literally go right now outside this room and find you anywhere on the internet or wherever else, because you've made it round. You just mentioned, we've got headline news here of a prime minister being assassinated, and this person. So it's real easy to be intimidated by that, except for the fact I've learned over time that I do have a space and we do have value as human beings, and that my gifts and my value, if I'm fearful and don't make every effort to fulfill my purposes here in this life, I'm probably depriving somebody else of them understanding something more about themselves so they can do more. It doesn't mean that I'm better than anybody else. It just means that sometimes you just got to go.
Chris, that's so wise. I mean, that is a revelation that a lot of people never get to in their life. They think everybody else has it figured out and you can't figure it out. And everybody else is better, and I obviously don't have that skill that individual has. And the truth is, we each have something to offer. We each have a skill. And I have my weaknesses. I have my strengths. You recognize you have the same. And by recognizing that you have that weakness and that strength, that is actually a strength in and of itself, because it makes you stronger. Right. Because then you can take your weakness and you can improve upon it. Or you could lean on somebody who has the strength of where your weakness is and fill the hole that way. And it becomes a team type of effort, and that makes you a well-rounded and stronger person going forward. That's why I appreciate our friendship. That's why I appreciate us getting to know each other, because you've been through this journey, and you offer skills that I don't have, and
vice versa.
And you need them. You need them at times, and might not need them every day. But there are going to be moments where I can pick up the phone and talk to you and get, hey, what do you think of this?
Always.
And that's huge. And it goes both ways.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not some big speech either. How many times, I can tell you how many times your text message comes through out of nowhere, and it's perfect. Just like, hey, just thinking about you here, just encouraging word. Bam. And I'm like, That was no speech. It wasn't no big phone call. It wasn't a podcast. It wasn't an interview. It wasn't some lunch. It was just like, hey. And, I got other people that aren't U.S. congressmen. I got, people that are barely in recovery that do that,
And it's also the power of recovery that is on display. Because as I've gone through, again, my journey involves my recognition of my spirituality and my higher power. And once you open your mind to that, and to me, that's worked very well with me, because you see what we call, my wife and I call God winks. You see that you're on the right path because He and friends are sending you the right signal at the right time, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is freaky. This is freaky that this just happened, but it reaffirms to me, that we're on the right path and that it's something bigger than just winning the race or becoming a member of Congress. It's deeper than that, and it's so fulfilling.
Right. We're going to definitely talk about the hope, as we close this thing out on a positive trajectory. But there is a path that's gotten you here, and there have been some struggles. And you look at right from a young age. And I know you're passionate about trauma and youth. I think that one of the values that you'll bring to this episode is that the sidebar. Some of the work that I've done at South by Southwest, I was on a panel that talked about trauma and leadership. And there was studies showed that 70% of the population underneath a leader, and this was a study done by the Navy actually, that the leader's gone through a traumatic event, divorce, death, something in combat, they see a significant degradation in their ability to lead and a fall off in morale in the team and all this sort of stuff. So we were talking about the importance of a leader recognizing they're human being too. And if they have a traumatic event that's undealt with, they should address that because they're humans too. Even though they have great responsibilities, as a human, they got to take care of that business. The other thing that we've noticed is through work with 100 Proof Living is that $178 billion a year is lost in productivity due to binge drinking and things like that. So, and we're finding that that's hidden, Corporations subsidize it all the time because it's a must. You have to have it. And that
becomes part of the culture.
Yeah, you earn it.
Yeah.
And so you and I both know that whether it's attorneys, CEOs, nurses, doctors, whatever, the same population has a similar situation where they have these hidden things. They all have traumas. They all have reasons why they're hiding. And, so one of the values you bring is to say, you and I have both been in different roles, and professionally I've been in certain roles, and you obviously been a very public figure. We know that as human beings, we struggle. And how do, this segment of it, I want people to understand the humanity of that and how they relate to those individuals to say, it is okay for you to kind of deal with these things now and stop procrastinating because destruction's closer than it seems if you don't deal with it.
And if you continue to live in denial and you don't heal that wound, the symptoms are going to potentially take you down, which it almost took me down.
So we talk, one of the challenges you faced, obviously, what other challenges do you feel? But I think that was born out of, obviously some trauma as a child. At least that's what you've professed to me in the past. And I don't know if how you want to treat that.
No, it definitely, through my recovery and my sobriety, there's always been a hole in my life that I carried. In the beginning, I never recognized it consciously when I was a kid. But when your father passes, at the age of 2, and you don't hear those words, "I'm proud of you," and it's even tough now to bring it up right now. I'm getting emotional thinking of it because it's still a scar. It's still a trauma that is there. And for years, I never dealt with it. I just said it is what it is. It's part of who I am. And he died, and that's the end of the story. But the reality is there's more to the story, And as I was raised, and my mom, God rest her soul, and she protected me by not dealing with the truth. And the truth was that he ended up killing himself. He was a Silver Star, war-decorated World War II Korea veteran. And in my mind, that set the bar of like, oh my God, this guy was like walk on water, the kind of looking up to going, this guy was, in the stories of how he won the Silver Star, the Purple Hearts, because my brother did all this research and got the actual field notes and what the stories behind what he did to save his fellow band of brothers. And all of that. And then to come to find out that not only did he die, at the age of 48 that it was a suicide. And that's one of the reasons we were so dedicated to veterans work when you met me, is because so many veterans have experienced that PTSD, have experienced that impact in their life, and they've gone down a very dark path. And a lot of them have also made that decision to take their own life. And so through my recovery, I was able to forgive him. I was first able to recognize and honestly see what happened, what the background story was on that, and finally come to, holy cow, there was more to this than was ever given to me from my mother or brothers and sisters and that type of thing to protect me. But then just starting to, why would a person at the age of 48 who's got 12 kids, one that's 2, and other, 6 of us weren't even out of the house yet, not even out of high school, make the decision to do that. I couldn't imagine the pain that he was going through. I couldn't imagine the horror that he was going through.
And how many times had that scenario played out in his head before it was a quote unquote successful completion?
Correct.
I wonder.
Yeah, and I medicated that wound with binge drinking, alcohol. He chose to medicate that wound by that decision of taking his life, because he wasn't an alcoholic. He wasn't somebody who turned to drugs. He had his anger issues and other things that were there, but obviously the way he medicated with the trauma that he experienced was taking his own life. And if we can prevent one of those from happening here, to tell people, because a lot of us in addiction that have gone through this, you're one moment away from potentially killing yourself too, be it behind a car, be it behind being drunk, passing out in a field. You're a moment away.
Or causing yourself piles of stuff that you got to deal with too. That was my case, just a pile of reputation. My court cases were ridiculous because I couldn't stop drinking.
And essentially destroying yourself and your family.
Yeah, destroyed my family for sure. Yeah. I can't help but think, so when you and I first met, obviously you have to be guarded with people in your role, because people weaponize one word you say in public life. It's clear. That's one of the challenges of being in public life, one of the things you knew you were dealing with. You had mentioned that your father had passed, but you had also mentioned that there was some burden on you because now you knew you were around the age. At the time when we first met, you were just past the age, and you've outlived your father. And I know there was some of that there, and I at the time hadn't realized it was he had taken his own life until much later you'd shared that with me. That had in and of itself had to be, because I was thinking at first maybe it was a health choice he had, or you were worried about chronic illness and things like that, but actually technically you were. I mean, there's some mental health issues that cause us to become alcoholics. There's reasons why we take our life, obviously, for mental health issues. So I wonder if those events, and as you understood them and realizing that you don't have to be insulated, doesn't make you more of a man to insulate. It's not tough.
Thank you for listening. This is the end of part 1 of Victory of a Congressman with Tom Reed.